So thank you so much for joining us today. So this is Gayatri Joshi of Vorgate Impact, and I'm very pleased to introduce you to waste expert Michael Serve and CupZero co-founder. So you might remember Michael when we first introduced him, and I think it was 2018 or 2019, to discuss the strategies and the pitfalls to composting in city environments. And so today we have invited Michael to discuss the reuse economy and alternative waste reduction strategies. So why am I choosing this topic? So waste reduction strategies are a very necessary tool in your toolbox to reduce environmental impact so that you can support the climate, biodiversity, and communities, and ultimately like the economy, right? But most, if not all of you, have been asked by your stakeholders, your clients and employees, to report and explain what you're implementing and demonstrate how you're reducing your negative impacts in your business, like including operations. And really the next step is talking about creating positive impact. So, you know, we all live a bit of a filtered life and far too removed from the products and the services that we use. And so many of us don't have a strong grasp on the life cycle of the items that we consume and the impact it has on communities, the environment, as well as the economy. So Michael's going to discuss this cycle and how the cycle works and what strategies to employ, you know, as well as how innovative thinkers like Michael are providing solutions. So before we begin, I'm going to invite you to ask questions throughout the presentation, where Michael's going to explain a lot about how this life cycle works, what sort of the impact is, where does trash go, what is this process, what are the pitfalls and the challenges, and why we need to move towards these alternative strategies. And so again, please ask any questions in the chat box, and I'm going to now turn it over to you, Michael. Thank you so much.
Cool, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here with all of you today, and thank you for inviting me as well. You know, it's interesting to hear how long ago that last presentation was, and you know, I think we're talking 4 or 5 years, and I was actually on the other side of the coin at that. But part of that story is, you know, why I do what I do, because I was living in trash for a while. So my, you know, main intent is to really give you a little bit about my background. But really like the why I do what I do, because I've seen, you know, behind the curtain of things, how things actually work. And I think, you know, we've all kind of heard stories, but I try to explain it in really clear detail of why the current system really isn't working for us and isn't a sustainable solution in the long run. And then I'll get into kind of what is happening out there, what are the solutions that you can kind of currently employ, and then of course if you have any questions or have specific problems with your office, I'm happy to provide guidance there as well. And so as Gayatri said, I'm Michael. I'm the co-founder of a company called CupZero. I gave a TEDx talk a couple years back, really on why recycling isn't sustainable. But as a human, you know, I live in New York City. I live in Rockaway Beach. And so I walk the beach every day with my dog, and even as the weather gets nicer, I can see a notable difference in the amount of trash that washes up on shore at every high tide. And you know, beyond the carbon emissions, you know, what really impacts me as a person, as a human in this world, is that we're destroying our nature. You know, the most beautiful part of our planet is kind of covered in trash, and it will be for quite some time. Until we make some pretty drastic changes. And so I'm going to give you a quick tour on kind of how I grew up and became involved with trash and kind of that journey. So I'm going to take you on a 3-stop tour. I grew up in Connecticut. I don't know if y'all can see my my cursor, but you know, I grew up in the Northeast, not too far away from New York. Typical kind of suburban town, but as soon as I graduated college, I actually did a volunteer stint in South Africa. And so here I was working with some after school programs in some pretty impoverished communities. And on one hand, right, this was my first eye-opening view to somewhere else in the world. On one hand, they're like burning trash on the corner of the village. which is terrible, but at the same time, they're an incredibly resourceful communities as well, building their own roofs out of the scrap material that they find, taking around the same, plastic detergent bottle to refill over and over and over and over for years and years and years. And so on two hands, it's like the infrastructure is not there, but it's at the same time, they're really using their materials to the best as possible. And I was 23 at the time, and as any wise 23-year-old does, they follow the girl that they just met to Belgium, and I actually lived in Brussels for a couple of years. And here's a total mind shift, because Europe, I will say, is light years ahead of the US, especially when it comes to waste. And they've had to be, right? If you think about how Europe has evolved, they all grew from riverside cities next to ports, and then they grew out from there. And so when you have a dense population from the start, you need to manage your waste. And this is why, we see the first examples of modern day sewer systems come from Europe. The first examples of waste hauling, right, come from London when the ash market, was exploding in the 1800s with the population. But a couple cultural things, right? Like everyone sorts their waste perfectly. It's really clear. They have incentives. So for example, these bags on the right-hand side, the white one is a trash bag, and you have to buy that bag through the city. And it is the most expensive bag to buy. The recycling bag for metal, glass, plastic, and the recycling bag for paper is cheaper. And there's often compost bins as well. So there's financial incentives to sort your waste better and actually to make less of it. It's called a pay-as-you-throw program. But this, really blew my mind when I moved over there. It was like, oh, this makes so much sense to just do this. And glass, which I'll get back to later, is actually this centralized collection point where everyone has to go with their wine bottles, walk a couple blocks, and then actually separate their glass by different colors. And so I left there at about 26, and I moved to New York City, which is the home of Pizza Rat. And actually, sorry, Gayatri, I have to go back because I think I'm on the wrong presentation. Oh, never mind, I'm good. Yeah, and I think New York specifically, at least in my view, is probably one of the most wasteful cities out there. And it's like the most litter-filled cities too. There's like kind of this cultural thing where the bodega guy gives you 15 napkins and a plastic bag, even if you're just buying an apple. And then people walk outside and they've been surrounded by trash their whole life, so they just throw it on the street, right outside. And that was really eye-opening to me. And so when I moved here, I worked in a restaurant for a while. I ended up setting up the recycling program. And then I actually got a job working for a waste hauler, right? So I had a sales and account management job. I was going to restaurants and office buildings and gyms and retail stores, basically to try and get their business to get the contract to take away their waste and recycling. And so I got that job with the intention of getting people to recycle and getting people to compost. And I thought that was what I could do, to save the world, right? And the more and more I got into that job, and I went back to my operations person and saying, hey, can we take this in the recycling load? Can we recycle this? Is there anything that we can do with this? And getting no after no after no, I really lived through the limits of what recycling can do. And so New York has what's called a bifurcated waste system, right? All of the residential waste is taken out by the city. It's tax money that pays for it. We are spending $2 billion in New York City on trash. And so every time you want to complain about potholes and government positions and city positions and arts programs, just know that we're spending $2 billion on our waste in New York. And on the other side, all the commercial entities, so all the the restaurants, the office buildings, are all contracted by private waste haulers. And I used to work for one of those. And so I was on a waste audit for a commercial building portfolio, 15 big skyscraper buildings throughout New York. And part of that was, one, seeing how much the stuff weighs, and then 2, seeing how good it's sorted to see what can go into the recycling, and so what costs less to remove rather than the most expensive landfill. And I was in a building at midnight, and I pull out a bag from, the garbage dumpster, and then a bag from the recycling compactor, and I see this. These are pictures from the 2 different bags. And if you're looking, I don't know if anyone has any guesses as to which one is the quote unquote recycling bag. I don't know anymore. But the truth of the matter is, like, both of these are trash because they're so poorly sorted, and they'll end up in the trash. And so I had this year-long epiphany of, we're not doing well at sorting. I know where all of this is going at the end. And so really we need to make the systems that make less waste in the first place. And so we all think, right? And I want to really lay into how recycling works, because it's a fallacy the way that it's been taught to us. We think we put something in the blue bin and it becomes another water bottle, right? But meanwhile, if you're thinking about your office, you put it in the blue bin, let's say. There's a cleaning crew, right, that's going around your office. Are they going around with 1 bag or 2 bags? Even if they are going around with 2 different bags, where are they taking it? If you have a look at your own loading bay or the basement or the curb or wherever the waste goes out at the end of the night, sometimes even if the bags are separated, they are all going to the same place. And I've seen it. And even if it's 2 different, dumpsters, it might be 1 truck that's coming to pick everything else up. And I've seen that too. And so even if there's 2 different trucks coming for it, it still needs to go to the right place to get sorted out too. And so what we think about when we see recycling, and these are some of the videos that we've seen, right, is the conveyor belts, the machinery that's sorting different kinds of equipment. And so the garbage and recycling truck, they take it to this facility. It's called a materials recovery facility. And this is just the sorting facility. It is separating the cardboard from the metal, from the glass. It's putting it into a big cube. And then they are reselling that on an international commodities market to other businesses, right? So this is a global scrap material trade that requires businesses to buy this scrap material in order for it to work and be recycled. You can recycle technically anything you want, but does it make sense to is a totally different thing. And so I've kind of boiled down recycling into this basic equation. And this is how, I think recycling makes sense to me, and it doesn't make sense in some places. But these are the general rules of the game. And once you know the rules of the game, you can start to make changes in your own lives, in your offices, and make decisions based on this. And so recycling works when the value of the material, the value of the scrap is higher than the cost to collect it and transport it and to sort it out and also to shred it and remelt it and to make it into something else. And so conversely, if the cost to collect it and to sort it out and to reprocess it into something else that you can sell is higher than the value of the material, it's not going to get recycled because we are operating in a global scrap industry. And so this makes a lot of sense to me when I start to think about where recycling works and it doesn't work, and for what materials it works for and not. And so if you think about metal, for example, the scrap value of that is really high. Basically, it's expensive to mine metal. And so the value of scrap metal is quite high. It's heavy, so it costs a lot to transport, but it's actually really easy to sort it out because all you need is a big magnet or an electrical current, and then it all gets sorted out for you. Furthermore, when you melt it into something else, it doesn't need to look pretty, right? Like this is going to be another iron rebar surrounded by concrete, and it doesn't matter what it looks like. So the reprocessing costs are actually less. If you think about fibers like cardboard or paper, typically these things are already sorted for you, right? If you think about like a distribution center with all the boxes, all those boxes are already clean and they're already in a cube, ready to be sold already. And so this makes the right side of the equation less. Glass is actually a tricky one. And so I mentioned, in Europe, right, they're separating it by the colors. If we look at the left side of the equation, the value of glass cullet, the scrap glass, is actually quite low. And that's because glass is made of sand. And so when you're competing with the price of dirt, you don't have a lot of flexibility to work with here. It's heavy, so it costs more to transport. It's actually really expensive to sort it out because it gets crushed into a truck. It's in little pieces. You actually need to separate the clear glass from the colored glass because the colored glass has metals added to it to make it the different color, and you can't melt them at the same temperatures. So all of that means that the sorting cost, the reprocessing cost, the transport are really expensive. And I will say that really the only glass that's being recycled in the US is in the bottle bill states, right? In the states that have deposits, that people are bringing it to the grocery store, it's being separated by colors in the machine, and then it's being recycled. And so in other parts of the industry, there's hundreds or thousands of players. There's one glass recycler on the whole East Coast, and they're not taking anything from restaurants or office buildings. They're only taking the bottle bill stuff from grocery stores. And so in New York, at least when I was working in the industry, all the wine bottles, all the liquor bottles are all being landfilled. And plastics.
I'm just going to interrupt you for 1 second,
Sure.
if that's okay. So a friend of mine who works in the healthcare industry works in procurement, and they have been trying to find the green colored glass to see if they can kind of pull that from recycling. But it's impossible to find because that's just not what's coming out from what the recyclers actually have, is that green colored glass. So trying to find someone like that market for it, it's really hard, even when buyers want something. But continue. So I just wanted to add on to it.
Yeah, and so in general, like the clear stuff is more valuable because it has more versatility later. And so again, these are businesses that are buying the material, and the businesses want flexibility. You can always add color in, but you can't take it out. And basically, clear glass sells more mayonnaise or sells more mustard than green glass does. And so that's one of those things where the recyclers of it have not found a value in collecting the green stuff. So they're only taking the clear. And that's kind of what it sounds like is happening with your friend who's looking for that. Plastic, same deal, right? Same mayonnaise mechanism, right? Where the clear plastics are what's valuable because there's more versatility out of it. This is, I think, what's top of everyone's mind because single-use plastics are really rampant and they're really detrimental. I'll say that in a minute. Plastics are all different types of materials. So, the numbers that are surrounding the triangles, that doesn't actually mean that it's recyclable. It just tells you what kind of plastic it is. Basically, the highest value on the left side of this equation is number 1 and number 2 plastic. So that is like water bottles is number 1. Number 2 is like laundry detergent bottles and milk jugs, for example. Those perform the best when they are shredded and remade into something else. And that's why they have the highest value. But it costs a lot to sort them out because they're often dirty. You need fancy optical sorters that are really expensive to separate the different types of plastic. You can't separate it by magnets, for example. So it really relies on these optical sorters or a lot of labor to do that. So the sorting cost of it is quite a lot. And plastic is made from oil. And so when gas prices are down, so is the price of virgin plastic. And that's what we're seeing, in the market, that it's not really viable, or it's not cheaper at least, to recycle plastics. And another common misconception is we think a plastic water bottle is going to become another plastic water bottle. It's much more likely that water bottle is going to become carpet, or to become fake grass, or to become a lawn chair, or something like that. Typically plastic gets downgraded, and it really has like one additional use after that. And so other things that affect this equation, right? Like dirty or poorly sorted material, if you can guess, it increases the sorting costs. It increases the reprocessing cost because you need to add extra steps there. It also decreases the value of the material as well. So that's when they say if you don't rinse your containers, it ruins the load. That's kind of alluding to this point, is it makes the sorting more expensive and it decreases the value. And so that might make the whole bag unrecyclable. And so distance to markets, like I said, we're on this global scrap trade. We're not really recycling a whole lot in the US. For the most part, we're shipping it to Asia, countries with cheaper labor forces. And so the cheapest method of transport to those end markets is by boat and by sea. So basically, cities next to ports are the most likely that it's going to be recycled. But again, that's the transport cost, right? Boats are the cheapest way to ship things around the world. And volume and population density also, play a role. So population density, if you're in New York, for example, your trucks run more efficiently because they have more volume on one block, right? They can collect more material on one block. But if you go to Vermont, they have to drive, a quarter mile in between each house to get just a little bit. So that decreases the transport costs in dense areas. Volume, the same thing. And so consumer demand kind of also affects this. And so Gayatri, to your friend's point, right? If there's a lot of demand for green glass and we are willing to pay more, or companies are willing to pay more for that particular material, it's going to be collected. Look, if you throw gold in trash cans, we will find a way to sort that out. We will find a way to find the gold, but the value is not always there. And so opting for things as a consumer or as a business from recycled content helps fuel that demand for that material to be collected. And so those last 3 points, right? And I'm speaking to New York City. I know we're kind of around the country. But New York has one of the best case scenarios in terms of like what could be recycled that doesn't really exist everywhere else. So the city, this is the city contract for residential. They're taking the waste of 8 million homes, right? Every day it's all going to the same place. It's in Sunset Park. It's on the water as well. They have top of the line sorting equipment because of that. So they have a 20-year contract with the city of New York to recycle all of the waste. And so when you have a 20-year contract for, one of the biggest, if not the biggest market in the US, you can invest in better equipment. You can start to negotiate your prices of the materials that you have. You have enough of niche materials to try and resell that somewhere else. And that doesn't exist in Ohio. That doesn't exist in Virginia. That doesn't exist in Colorado. And so stories from New York and California, I believe, are really detrimental to everyone else because we think that it is this pipe dream that things can be recycled, but they only can be recycled under these really extreme set of conditions that doesn't exist everywhere else in the country. And also it doesn't exist in the same city on the commercial end when that market is split between a bunch of different players. And so if you look at this is what New York City accepts. I have my doubts, to be honest, of whether this is actually recyclable, but you can't put this in your restaurant. Like this same mix doesn't work. And so what you can recycle just changes all the way across the country. And there's no wonder why we're confused about it and that our trash and recycling bags look the same, because the answers are different everywhere. And one more thing, and I just have one slide on this. The compostable products are really not a solution. They're more CO2 intensive, they're more water intensive to make. But at least in New York, basically they go to industrial composting facilities. They all have screening mechanisms to sort out what looks and feels like other packaging. So what those facilities are getting is, a pallet of expired corn in cans, for example. And so they have a machine to separate the can from the corn, right? They're getting expired chicken pallets, right? And so they have a machine that separates the foam thing of the chicken and the film plastic, and all of that gets landfilled. So the bioplastic cups and forks and plates and packaging all gets filtered out in the same mechanism, and it is all being landfilled. So every commercial hauler in New York is going to the same 3 places. All 3 of them have this machine, have this process. And so every, compostable thing at every restaurant that we're buying, like, it's going to landfill. And this is, why I do what I do, again, because I've seen this, and it's just like this lie that we're living to ourselves. And so here we go. Here's some actual stats of recycling rates to kind of go with that equation that I just proposed. So if you look at metal, right, we have a pretty good recycling rate of metal, 70%. Plastics, we're down to 5%. So 95% of plastics are being, not recycled. And if you look at like the numbers overall for recycling rates for the USA and, New York City, we're talking like 20 or 30%. We are like nowhere near an F on a test. If we were being graded on this, we're nowhere near. We have a C- in not recycling, right? We have an A in not recycling plastics. And it's taken 50 years, right? The modern recycling movement started in the 70s, and it's taken us 50 years to get to 32% in the US. So my question, right, for all of you is, do we want to keep pushing for this? And in 2070, maybe we'll have a C- in recycling. And this is where I kind of want us to give up on it, right? And to do higher level, more impactful things to actually solve the problem. And so we all grew up with the 3 R's, right? Reduce, reuse, and recycle. Unfortunately, the manufacturers themselves have pushed recycling on us as the solution, right? And what breaks my heart is that there's 8-year-olds in school that are already brainwashed, saying like, we need to do good for the planet, we need to recycle more. And it's not true, right? Like I kind of want everyone to come out of here like thinking that a little bit guilty about recycling, that, yes, that's slightly better than the landfill, but really that's not what we need to be focusing our efforts on. We need to like rethink the way we do things and then move higher up that value chain. Here is the definition of waste. To use or expend carelessly, extravagantly, or to no purpose. And again, my question is, why are we trying to manage this? Like, we are talking about waste management. Why are we trying to manage expending carelessly, when really like this is something that we need to do less of? And so here's kind of the current hierarchy. We've added a couple more R's to the list. If we're already in place, like let's say if your office is moving to a new building, like that's the time to rethink and redesign, right? Like make those decisions before things get set in motion. Design the space better, invest in like reusable inventory to try and make less waste in the first place. But we need to like rethink how we do things, and it's not crazy sometimes. Sometimes it's just like putting a thing in a dishwasher instead of buying a disposable version. But those are the steps that we need to take, especially in new environments. That's like the best case to start thinking about that. Obviously reducing, so that's like, do I need this or not at all? For other things that you do need, you want to use that as much as possible. And then if you can't really do it, or if you're stuck with it, and I understand as consumers, we do not always have the choice. Waste is being pushed onto us, and it's not always possible to be a good human in a lot of places. But that's when you recycle. But you should kind of feel bad already, like what steps can I take to change that? And then obviously we're recovering the materials, we're trying to minimize the actual environmental impact on it. And then of course, things do get landfilled and burnt quite a lot. And so don't worry, everyone. It's not all doom and gloom. This is kind of where we move to the sunshine and rainbows. It's going to take work, but there are things we can do in our own lives, right? And then also there's a suite of business solutions, right, that my company is a part of, that's trying to provide the solutions, in a viable, sustainable way. And then we also need really like policy and legislative help to get this thing done. So it all starts with ourselves, right? And I'm not gonna, harp on this because you've all heard it before. I know I get told too. But the bring your own coffee cup and the bring your own water bottle thing does hold true. But I put this in here not to tell you to do it, but I'm telling you to think about how you can make it easier for when you forget, because you will forget. And so if you have 3 to 5 reusable coffee cups, like I think everyone does, put one at the office, put one in your car, bring one with you, and basically you want to reduce the chances of you forgetting or being caught without one, when you inevitably will forget. The same thing goes for water bottles. The same thing goes for grocery bags, right? If you drive, keep them in your car. If you typically go after work, have one in your work bag or your purse. Utensils, you can get these anywhere, and it doesn't have to be a kit. You can just take a fork and a knife from your home and just have that with you. That fits in almost everything that you're going to carry. And again, this is part of like the rethinking, right? Like you know this already, but rethink your life. When do I go to the grocery store? How can I make sure, I'm prepared when I do forget, because you're going to forget. I forget. I'm not, by the way, I'm not a perfect human. I'm just really trying. I'm giving the talk, but we're all working on this. But some things at home, if you've got like old cloth rags instead of paper towels, I've got a set of like nice napkins for guests, and I have a set of like really grungy rags that I use for like everyday, stuff to wipe up counters and stuff. Composting at home is not as hard as you think. If you are in a city, I would recommend your freezer. So put it in something. I have a bowl on my countertop, and then I put that in I have a 5-gallon bucket on my balcony. That's my system, but I know a lot of people put it in their freezers. There's a bunch of drop-off points as well, so you don't need a backyard to do this. And there's a bunch of services as well that can start to collect your stuff. There's also, if you have heard of the internet, I would recommend seeing what you could make at home. So toothpaste, for example, is like a super easy recipe. Coconut oil, a little bit of baking soda. If you want to add mint to it to make it taste good, you can make your own toothpaste at home. You won't be able to get away from like the packaging that the baking soda comes in, but you're trying to minimize, the stuff that you have at home. But homemade cleaners and soap is not too crazy to make. You need lye if you ever go down that road. It's kind of fun to do that process. But again, it's kind of seeing, what's there. The best way to see what you're creating is to see your trash and to see what you're throwing out. But ultimately, right, like consumers can't do it all, and we've been pushed to solve this problem on our own, and like the burden of recycling has been put on consumers too. But really, to be a good human in New York, you need to carry around camping gear. You need to carry around like your own bowl, your own utensils, your own water bottle, your own cloth napkin, your own coffee cup. And realistically, in big cities, when people are on the move, it's not possible to do that, which is why we need both government and business support. And so again, that's where kind of I come in. I'm going to give you an overview of how CupZero started, and what we're currently doing, and kind of where we're going as well. And so we're a reusable cup service, or a reusables as a service provider is probably the better way to put it. But we started with, how can we take high volumes of single-use cups and replace them with reusable options? So what we do, let's say you're hosting a festival, or let's say you have a fleet of boats. Let's say you're Smorgasburg, let's say you're a nightclub, let's say you are a convention center, let's say you are an art gallery. These are all actual customers that we have. We try and plan out how many disposables they're going to use. We deliver them to the venue, just like you would order disposables. It gets delivered to you. Everything that we deliver comes in a reusable bin that we also take back. But those items get distributed to the bars or to the caterer or whoever needs them. A lot of our customers use deposit systems to get the attendees to bring the cup back. The cleaning crew, just like they're going around for trash, they're also going around to get the cups back and put them in containers for us. And then we wash them off site. So we retrofitted a restaurant in Queens, and basically we built a high-powered washing line that can wash things at scale. And then once everything is sanitized commercially, we quality control it, we pack it up, and it gets ready to be used again and again and again. So we use polypropylene as our material. It's number 5 plastic. A lot of reasons for that is it's lightweight, so you can move around 20,000 of them at a time. It still fits into like a reasonable expense for our clients as well. And it's just super, super durable. You don't have to worry about it shattering or breaking. And you can throw these things around and they'll survive a nightclub at 2 a.m. And so we started in 2019, before the pandemic. And the last time I spoke, I was working for the Waste Hauler. I quit that job in February 2020, and we rode out the pandemic. My partner and I together, and we've made it out to the other side. And this actually has to be updated since I made this. But we've done 600 different events and like venue deliveries in New York since 2020, 2021. Anywhere from like 100 people to 30,000 people, and this number is actually around 700,000 at the moment of disposables that we've helped our customers avoid throwing out. So we have a pretty high-powered washing line. We can wash like 200,000 units a week. We're operating on like a rolling inventory of about 75,000 units, but we also have a hub in Miami and as well as LA, and we're actually the washing provider for other reusable companies. The landscape is kind of shaking itself out, where there's like the washing partners, but there's also the tech providers that keep containers in circulation. There's a whole set of reverse logistics to get things back from people, a second return trip, for example, and all of that's shaking out. And while we have a big washing facility, we might as well put it to use and help some other companies out along the way. I kind of briefly mentioned these are our cups. Since I made this, we do actually have reusable plates and reusable cutlery utensils as well. So we can help events do a totally zero waste thing. We did a festival last month in Vermont. It wasn't super big, but there were 600 people there, and they made 1 bag of trash for the entire festival because everything was reusable. All the wine and beer was in kegs. We had reusable cups. All the food trucks were serving on our reusable plates. And the only trash was really like the paper towels coming out of the porta potties, which I think was really amazing to see. And these are some of our customers. We started off in like nightlife, think about like warehouse parties in Brooklyn. But we've gotten to work with some pretty big notable brands, some office buildings, boat lines, like I said, some small and medium-sized festivals, big caterers as well in New York. Basically everywhere where there's a disposable item that we can replace is kind of who we work with. And I kind of briefly mentioned our customers often use deposit systems. So if you're thinking of a concert venue, for example, the idea is that when you are attending the concert, when you buy your first drink, you pay a deposit for your cup. And so when you swap it out, you don't pay that deposit, but then when you return it at the end of the night, you can actually get your money back. If you can imagine yourself in that concert, or if you can imagine the average, 23-year-old in Bushwick, not everyone actually collects their money at the end. So the venues actually end up making a profit from running these programs. That's not why we do what we do, but we figured that out pretty early, that was a benefit for them. And there's a bunch of different options that we run. I think what's applicable in your world, I don't think a deposit system is going to make sense in an office. But what there is a reduction in cost from buying disposables, especially if you can do it in your own dishwasher. And really, there's a lot of data on employee satisfaction from being in a sustainable workplace, knowing that the company that you're working for is doing what they can to make the world a better place. And it's somewhere around the lines of 70 to 75% of employees say that this is meaningful to them. So if you're looking at retention metrics, employee satisfaction metrics, the sustainable practices that you implement in your workplace do have value. And so these are some of our. This is kind of an alluding to our the revenue generated. But we average, a 92 to 93% recovery rate. There is always an inevitable loss rate. Things do go missing. But in general, our clients are making more than, they're paying us. And yeah, we've kind of operate from 200 to 20,000 people in last year in June. This is one of our venues in Miami, 4,000 people, but yeah, they're making $1,100 a night from working with us, and they're saving the world at the same time. We are not the only ones though, and I'm kind of giving you a big overview of all the reusable options. There's two other cup companies out there. One is called Turn, New Zealand Australian company. They're kind of based on the West Coast, and they're really working the big mega festivals. So think like Bonnaroo and Lollapalooza. Our cup is similar size to us, but they are in Denver for the most part, and they kind of start off doing souvenir cup programs, where they will sell a bunch of souvenirs, so at least you're not throwing away drinks 2, 3, and 4. And like I said, CupZero, we're in New York and in Miami, and we're looking at a couple different markets now to expand for. And again, we're not just cups anymore. We're also doing cups and plates and utensils. And so I'm not sure if anyone's heard of these things yet, but there are increasing solutions for you as a consumer and as an office to try and reduce your waste. There's a bunch of companies out there that are trying to solve this. We're at the beginning of an industry overhaul, and the packaging industry is $1 trillion. The waste management industry is $500 billion, and it's not just cups, it's not just delivery containers, it's your shampoo bottles, it's your toothpaste. There's a bunch of different companies operating in different areas to try and solve these problems. So this is an overview of a lot of them. CupZero is in New York City, and we're actually their washing partner, right? So you order delivery through, actually I have some, well, the images didn't show up. But the idea is that you order delivery through them. So you can order it through either the CupZero platform, you can order through Uber or Grubhub or DoorDash, and you can opt in for a delivery. And basically all of your delivery food comes in a reusable container to your home or to your office. And then you can either drop it off at any participating restaurant, or you can schedule a pickup through them to get it off your hands. And so all of those dirty containers, they come back to our washing facility. We make sure they're washed commercially and sanitized appropriately. Then they get packed up and ready to be reused again. Bold Reuse is in Portland. They were actually one of the first ones. They were running a very similar program to this. Dispatch Goods is this one at the bottom. They're using all metal containers. They're in California, I forget where. And then Don't Waste Durham is a kind of a nonprofit, for-profit hybrid that's in Durham, North Carolina. So I would, feel free to ask me, but if you're in New York, you've got options. If you're on the West Coast, you have options. Denver, you have options as well. CupZero's there. So these things are popping up, right? And it needs consumer demand and people to support this. Coffee cups to go. There's a bunch of companies out there. We actually have our own mobile app, so you can borrow a coffee cup at one place, and then you can drop it off at any participating one. It kind of works like a library system where it's free to borrow as long as you return it within 2 weeks. But we're in New York City. We've got 15 coffee shops in Brooklyn that we're working with. So if you're heading that way, you could do it. But Sharewares is in Vancouver. Muse is in Toronto. Cup Club is in California and London. And there's the two best models of this are in Germany and Australia. Again, the rest of the world is kind of ahead of the US, but we're getting there. And then, like I said, there's like this whole other sector of like direct to consumer products. So the one that I first heard of was Loop. It's run by TerraCycle. But the idea is that they've partnered with, Procter & Gamble and Unilever and Haagen-Dazs to make, reusable packaging for ice cream, for Axe body spray, for dish soap, whatever. And again, the idea is you return it to them, it gets cleaned, it gets reused again. The Rounds is selling like home staples and mason jars. So you can order almonds, you can order pretzels, you can order body wash, soap, oats, beans, and it all comes in mason jars, delivered to your home, gets picked up and then washed again commercially and ready to use again. Plain Products is doing like hand sanitizer, soap, and things like that. And there's kind of another subset of this. Grove Collected is an example of it, where they will sell you the jar, but then they'll ship you a concentrated version that you mix with water. So it's not a completely reusable thing, but what it does cut down on is the bulk of the packaging, and also it's better for CO2 emissions, because you're not shipping liquid around, you're really just shipping a concentrated mix of that. And then something that I see popping up in a lot of places is a place to refill items. So Whole Foods, for example, has a section, right, where you can bring your own container, you fill up your beans, you fill up your rice, whatever. New York has two that I know of that are expanding, Precycle in Brooklyn, and they're setting up a new location, I forget where. Earth and Me has a couple locations. I would poke around. If you look for refill store, these are kind of popping up everywhere. And I'm sure in the city where you are, there are some options for this. But ultimately, the businesses, we can't do it alone, right? Like CupZero needs customers to grow. And the more that we grow, the more single-use items we can save. And this is where, as a person and as an office, you can support reusable companies out there, because ultimately the investor funding is not quite there yet. And it's really, we're just scratching the surface on this. But there's a lot of companies out there that, need the support to kind of continue to prove the business models, ultimately to get funding from both investors and governments, to make this thing happen, to make like a really meaningful change in the long run, of course. And I'm not sure if anyone on this call is working in policy or legislation, but I think we're going to need, myself, the reusable companies and consumers, like we're going to need some government support. Ultimately, I think it's trending that way, because tax money, for the most part, is paying for waste, right? The Coca-Colas, the Nestle's, the Mars, they're the ones making the trash. They're selling it to us. We're putting it out onto the curb, and then tax money is what's paying for that. So it does make sense for governments to incentivize waste reduction, as a whole. But again, the U.S. is kind of full of lobbyists as well. So I'm not going to drill you on this, but there's a couple of resources I could point to. Beyond Plastics is a great organization for EPR, which is extended producer responsibility. That's basically the notion that, the Coca-Colas and the Nestle's of the world should have some kind of financial support in actually recycling the materials that they're, selling to us. But the National Reuse Network, that's open to everyone. You can see all the companies that I just mentioned, a bunch of, local communities trying to implement stuff, and it's a good place to get resources as well. And like I said, the U.S. is behind the game, but a lot of policies are being passed around the world. Europe is banning single-use bags, cutlery, straws, across the board. The UK has had a plastic bag tax for a long time. Kenya and Zimbabwe, who I guess you might not think about, have already banned, plastic bags and other hard to recycle plastics. And what I think is really important is Africa doesn't have the waste infrastructure that the rest of the world does. And so they're actually getting ahead of the game. Like, these things are never gonna, the recycling infrastructure is never gonna be built there. So they might as well skip that process in the first place. The US, it's getting there. But, we have 10 states that are doing a bottle bill, right? So you can return your can or your bottle for some kind of deposit. California, after implementing the plastic bag tax, saw a 71% reduction in plastic bags, which is crazy. Like, that really points to this thing actually works. But at the same time, they added back 29% in thicker bags. So I mentioned this before, right? Extended producer responsibility. And again, if you are at all in policy, you can reach out to me after this, to at least, as a sounding board if you'd like. But it's the idea that the producers are taking financial responsibility for the stuff that they make. The bottle bills are the most common, and they do actually work. Like these are the drastic increases in recycling from putting, a simple deposit on these. It's a whole economy. People are going around to collect these items for extra cash, and it does actually work. These are kind of the 10 principles for the effective ones. I'm going to kind of skip ahead to this, but just like we have packaging, just like we have fuel efficiency standards for cars and appliances, we kind of need those for packaging too. Like the stuff that can't be recycled and won't be recycled, we need to ban that stuff, and we need to actually ensure that it's going to a place that could be recycled. I will just say that there's a lot of loopholes in this, and these are the lobbying organizations that are pushing for recycling, and they're putting out the studies that say, hey, film plastic can be recycled, and we are making a difference by doing this. And if you look at the backers of the recycling partnership, it's Pepsi, it's Mars, it's Starbucks, it's General Mills, it's Coca-Cola. It's safe to say that this is a biased approach to what we should be doing. And then of course, again, if you ever do have your hand in grants or tax breaks, or if you're ever working on that side of policy, companies like myself, we need the grants. Local communities that are smaller than us, some town in Virginia that wants to start their own program, like they need funding for it. But I think the businesses that are doing the right thing should be getting tax breaks, and also like really great financing options too. All in all, it is urgent, I will say. It's not like we should be doing this thing. Like we need to be doing things years ago, and the time is yesterday for sure. But what I hope to showcase here is that people are working on this, myself included. You are also people that can be working on this, and there's solutions out there. We just need to take the steps to do it. So this is my call to action, and saying like it's not a tomorrow thing, it's a yesterday thing, because we really are in crisis, and really we're working on like how do we make this not worse. But there's a lot of area to grow. The solutions are out there, and I want to kind of open this up to questions, because I know you all have different office environments and home lives, and I hope just answer those and really help set you in the right place to take action where you can. Thank you.
So there is actually a couple questions. I was going to ask you this one before, but I'm going to meld this one into this particular question. It's really about many of the firms that we have. Some of them have switched over to reusables from having these disposables. But now the conversation's going back to, okay, we have these items that are breaking. We're spending so much money on water. We've had to hire someone to actually do the washing, and they're going through that cost-benefit analysis. So there's one piece of that I want you to address, and then there's this other question. So there's the cost piece, but then also the environmental benefit. So is there any data that shows how much we're negatively impacting the environment by using more water because of running the dishwasher versus using all of like the silver and the plates and using compostables? So what can you speak to in terms of cost benefit plus environmental benefit for those who are going through that process right now?
Sure. And so if you're going through a cost benefit analysis, I think you have to define your cost benefit. Is it strictly a financial decision for you, or is it an environmental decision that's also mixed with a cost decision? That's kind of my first answer. If you're looking at just the cost side of things, try to factor in the cost that you're not actually incurring. So if you're in, if you're 4 floors on an office building, for example, you're not going to see the waste savings, right? But that is a savings that is being accounted for. but you are going to see the reduction in disposals as well. If you're experiencing loss or breakage, how do you adjust your communication to minimize that, as possible? Maybe a different material that doesn't break, for example, might be the answer to you. In terms of environmental impact, reuse is the winner across the board, like every scientist will agree. And just to give you a stat for cups, at least, it takes a gallon of water in the production to make a single-use plastic cup. So it takes 8 cups of water just to make the plastic inside of a plastic cup. Commercial dishwashers are actually really water efficient these days. So, your at-home dishwasher uses like a gallon of water and it washes everything in there. Ours, for example, uses half a gallon of water for 36 cups. So with that same gallon of water it takes to make one disposable one, we're washing 72 cups. So we're 72 times more water efficient within us. It's a complicated one when you think about transport, but across the board, it takes a lot of resources to make disposable things in the first place. And so reuse is the answer every time, or reduction.
So here's a fun question. So you answered this before, but if you could go over it again. So where is this available other than in New York? So all these reuse services, like CupZero, Deliver Zero.
I mean, I know New York because that's the hub, but there's a lot in California. Yeah, there's a bunch in California, and then Denver as well. We're in Miami. If you give me some cities that we're trying to solve for, I can probably find resources. But if you do some Googling and looking, like reusable cups, reusable plates, reusable delivery, you'll start to get some resources, and they're popping up all around the country. So there's some that are a lot smaller than us, for example, that are 3 years behind, but they're in smaller cities that like we might not look at as a market, but someone who lives there cares about this and is willing to start up some kind of project for it. And I will say too, so if you're in an office and if you're in New York or Miami, my goal is to replace your disposable items. So if you're having problem with like hiring someone to wash stuff in your office, there is a place where it makes sense for a third-party washer to come in and do it. We're pretty comparable to the price of compostables. And so if you are spending a lot on breakage and stuff like that, it might make sense to look for a third-party provider like us. And like if you have a use for it, we can get those items and wash them for you.
So here's the fun question. So can these be purchased with a custom logo?
So what the question is, can we customize the cup?
Yeah, for custom logos.
Yeah, so yes is the answer. We've kind of drawn our line as a company. We don't want to do it for a one-time use because then we're just making swag out there. But if it's for a recurring use, we're happy to customize that cup, put your logo on it, and then run the same washing process. So we're doing that with a couple of event producers and venues at the current moment. And yeah, that's totally possible. We would run the same logistics with your cups.
And then there is one question I have for you. Are you running into any situations where maybe some previous legislation has made it a little challenging to institute reuse? Or do you find that the market's really opening where there's more and more legislation that is encouraging reuse?
There's no legislation I can point to, but I think the perception is kind of an uphill battle that's getting better. The pandemic specifically was a really tough time to, I guess, pitch like the safety of what we were doing, because it was a new concept. That was really the only thing I could point to that was a really uphill battle for it. It was one of those things where, we're using a similar dishwashing process to that of a restaurant, right? So if you had eaten out at a restaurant on a plate and using a glass from a restaurant, we're implementing the same process. But because it was framed a little bit differently, there was some distrust around that. And that's the only thing I can point to. I will say, honestly, this summer, it feels like the pandemic is kind of behind us, where that wasn't a constant question that I was asking for and having to give that exact example. But policy-wise, not necessarily. I think the regulations need to be updated and adjusted for what's currently happening, because they're really unclear for us to follow the rules that aren't really existent. So we basically place ourselves in like a caterer role, right? Like we're using dishware and we're transporting it from place to place, and those are the guidelines that we're adhering to, and we're washing up to like high quality restaurant standards basically. But I do think that the Department of Health specifically needs to keep up with what's currently happening to make sure that not just us but like everyone is really making sure everything is up to the highest standard. And I'm not worried about us, but I do worry about a small company out there that kind of tarnishes the reputation of us all.
That's fair. You know what? We do have one more question, and I know we're a little past our hour. So here, I'm going to ask this as our last question. So there's one of the firms, they are not able to have a washer to use reusables, but they want to know if it would be better to use items that are recyclable, or should they use compostables and just throw them in the regular trash?
That's a tough question. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of places, right? Like especially in cities, the price per square foot is high, and so no one has an extra, allotment of square footage that's willing to put a dishwasher in. I mean, my question is, is there a third-party washer out there in whatever city that you're in? 2, can you incentivize your employees to bring their own stuff and bring it back to minimize whatever single-use items that you need to? And the compostable versus recyclable one, I would first check with your building and the loading dock to see what's possible. You need to figure out who's taking it and what they can take. So that's a conversation with the waste hauler and seeing what they can actually will take, whether that will actually happen. And then I think it gets a little bit subjective, because let's assume that maybe they're both going in the trash, because they might be. The compostable items, or quote unquote compostable items, seem to be more carbon intensive and seem to be more water intensive to create, but they're not plastic and they're not big oil. So I think it's maybe whether you want to fund one or the other. But it seems to be all the big players, right? It's big corn that's making the bioplastics. Once it becomes a bioplastic, molecularly, it looks exactly the same as plastic, so it lasts just as long as regular plastic does. I think it's just about who you maybe want to support. The real answer is, look for all other options first. But if you're going to try and bank on recyclability, you got to see who's picking it up and if they're taking it. Actually, take a tour of your loading dock and see.
That's excellent. You have to kind of go back a few steps before saying yes or no on a question like that. Michael, thank you so much. This was just such an informative just conversation, presentation. Again, I feel like we kind of live that filtered life where we're so separated from all of the things that we interact with on a daily basis, and just having that education of how things come to our doorstep is really important. I am going to share this presentation, and I'm going to share, it seems like there are a couple folks who are interested in maybe some of your services, or maybe some direction if there's some way to kind of continue and encourage this reuse. So if that's okay, I'm going to do that. And do you have any last comments for our group?
No, I don't. I hope, after this, take a look at what's around you and see what can be done. I'll make sure my contact info is in the presentation, and I'm happy to help in any case, right? Like whether that's contracting our services or if I can just, provide you some advice, I'm happy to do so in either case. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I'm happy to not see all of you, but know that you're all listening here.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Michael. All right. Take care, everyone. I'll send out all the materials sometime this week. All right. Take care. Bye.